Hello, this is Pharaoh Vincent, coming to you guys today with another Watcher of Realms video. And as promised, I want to spend a bit of time on this particular video talking about heroes. And it's hard to talk in a gacha space game about specific heroes and what they do, so I actually tend to lump a lot of my heroes into different categories that really are what I want to focus on. Like, what are people doing? And more than just the standard fighter versus defender versus marksman, mage, or healer, right? More than just these subsets. Within the subsets themselves, there are different kinds of heroes that do different roles that are very important. And so, what do I mean by that? I'm going to pick on an actual epic hero real quick, who's a mage. And this is Ai. If anyone has used her, she has a very weird range. It kind of spans out. And what she does is she puts these ice traps on the ground that detonate when people walk close to them, right? And the reason why this is important is because, she cannot attack air units with her attacks, even though it doesn't say that anywhere in her kit that she is not able to attack air units unless you have used her, right? So that's just an example, right, of a hero that falls within a category, but she doesn't really fall within the same category. Whereas you can have somebody like Zealous, who it does state that airborne units take half damage instead of full damage from their abilities. And so pay attention to what they have for where you're sending them. The three types of heroes that you're really going to use the most, and I'm not going to say that these are the only types. These are the three main ones that you use the most. Is going to be your legendaries, of course, your epics, and then your blues. Very, very early, day 1, day 2, you might be using some greens. I actually really like Cutter early. He's a fun one for like the first couple of days of your account. And you get him relatively easy. Liam's not bad for the first couple of days, right? But you will graduate out of these guys within a week, easy. If not by day 2. So they may just be day 1 heroes for you. But when it comes to everyone else, there's different sort of vibes that every hero gives, but I just want to call out some of the top handful and what they do and why it is important for you to understand this. Because you have fighters like Abomination, and you can get him free to play. He's a fusion-based legendary, so you can actually get him for free just from the fusion shop over on the summoning side. He is a fighter, but when you start looking at his stats, and especially at max level, you're going to notice that he's got 30,000 base hit points. He's actually more of a tank than he is a just standard fighter, right? So you can use him as a pseudo tank. When hit points drop, down, he gets an invulnerability that lasts for 4 seconds, which does go up in duration, right, to 5 seconds. And that's huge. Like, this right here is a massive skill. And it's really nice, even though, can only be triggered, one time every 55 seconds. Still, it's very, very, very nice. Boundless Endurance is his ultimate. It actually extends his attack range to 2 squares and applies burning. So why is he important? He is a very early to get tanky fighter. And every account needs at least one good tanky fighter. The reason being is, especially early in the campaign, you really don't need tanks as much as you think you do. Having somebody like an Abomination as a tank, who also deals pretty decent damage while being tanky, is very good to have. Some other examples of the sort of tanky fighter vibes going to be Elder. He's really good. He's a Northern Lord, of course. If you happen to pull him, great. I think Cyrus is pretty tanky if you build him that way. I know Kineza does a good job of it, right? Thalon, I think, is pretty decent. Valderon's insane. On the epic side, right, you get Wrath, who's awesome. Gluttony, who's also nice. I mean, heck, you can make Voroth pretty decent for that, and he also does counterattacks and has specialized attack speed. Just saying, he's actually really good. Don't sleep on him. You have Estrid. There's a ton of these, like, really good fighters, right? Rourke, who's the newest Northerner Lord, he's actually in that tanky fighter category. And we have one more coming out soon that's going to be part of the Supreme Arbiters faction that comes out, I believe, on the 27th, who would also be in that sort of vibe. Again, every account needs at least one good tanky fighter. And, you have Abomination and Volca and Wrath that you get free to play completely. Like, the game just kind of gives them to you. She's at the end of the storyline. You can fuse him. You get him at I can't remember, a certain amount of days played. All of them are good. So, just saying, pick your poison. They're all good. Within the defenders, you have two kinds of defenders that you really want to focus on. The first one is going to be crowd control. That's going to be Torador, Reeve. These guys have these big area of effect crowd control abilities. He has a big stun. He has it's technically an immobilize, but it hits like a stun, and it's in a massive friggin' range. I don't know. Reeve's really good for it, but he is also a exclusive hero, so you don't get him in the regular summoning pool. You have to get him through an event. Regulus is okay for the second kind that you really want to focus on, which is going to be your invulnerable tanks. So I actually use Regulus whenever I need an invulnerability. Same thing for Baron, right? These guys have that nice invulnerability. Technically Torador has one too. It's just not as good as these two. The animation is so long that it does kind of count for it, and so you can absolutely use him for that. Same thing for Titus, right? He has a very long animation when he dies, when he comes back. So you can use him as kind of a pseudo invulnerable tank. But these guys who are unkillable, very, 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 very good for all kinds of content that you're expecting your tank to get one shot at a specific point. And then you have what I like to call the meaty boys. Meaty boys are decent for if you need a meaty boy. They don't hit hard, but they do one thing, which is be meaty. Brokir, great example. Good for artifact material rate early on for tanking the boss, because that boss hits like a friggin' truck. Olog, who is a free unit, right? You get him as soon as you complete the first, fight in the after the prologue of Void Dungeon, the Void Rift. So he's a very good hero. I do recommend leveling him up. The last kind of thing to call out about tanks is, again, you really don't need them. For the most part, in most content, you're probably never going to use a tank. Especially once you start getting really good fighters. A really good fighter is better than a really good tank, in my humble opinion. I mean, some exceptions for the legendary heroes, right? Legendary lords like Torador and, Cyrus. I mean, he hits like a truck, right? So some of these guys, they do really good damage, so don't sleep on them. But I would build them more like a DPS than I do like a tank 9 times out of 10. So most of the tanks that I use are really being used for damage or crowd control. Not really used for tanking. Because after a while, things just one-shot your tanks anyways. So, food for thought. Early on, if you get this chick, she's really good. Hint, hint, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Same thing for this one. Isolda's awesome. Anyways, moving on. Marksman. So, Marksman's a controversial one for me, because all of the marksmen generally do a similar, if not same thing. with exception to like Hex. Hex deals magic damage, and so he's like really good at Guild Boss, but he doesn't do as good at like anti-flying things, unless of course it is a golem looking thing. Anytime that he's hitting like a stone flying unit, he does a little bit better than everyone else, but Hex is weird. So Hex excluded, everyone else. They all do the same thing. They're going to hit airborne units really hard. They're all going to generally do piercing damage. Few exceptions for magic damage, right? There's a couple of them out there. Hex and Lunaria are just 2 examples. There's another one coming out soon that is a marksman that also deals magic damage. So there's one more coming out that I'm aware of. I don't know. I imagine she does magic damage. Yeah. I just never got Philippa. But you get the point. There's a couple of them. They're pretty cool. The ones that I want to call out, though, are the most important ones, which is like Hotsit. Without a doubt, Hotsit. Alora's okay. And then all the way down here on the epics, Vargas. These 3 all have invisibility. And the reason why that's important is you pretty much need to have one of these guys in Gear Raid 3, or you're going to have to use Idril, who is, without a doubt, the most useful fucking marksman at Epic, period. Just throwing that out there. Idril is insane. Level her. You're good. Don't worry. So there's that. These guys deal really good damage. Most of them are single target. The ones that are AoE are very high cost, and they generally aren't great at damage. But they're usually good at something else, right? Like Theowen has good control. Maul is good at both control and damage, especially when you get him to his 5th awakening. We'll talk about awakenings in a future video, but we're going to move on to mages. Mages are actually kind of a dime a dozen. You really have 2 kinds, the AoE variety and the single target variety. For the most part, most of them are AoE, or area of effect, and most of them will hit more than one target, or they'll have an ability that bounces to an additional target, so on and so forth. It is for sure the area that I'm missing the most units in, for me at least, that are really, really good, other than, like, I mean, Hotsit is massively needed. I really want Boreas. That'd be a big one for me, because Lord knows, getting into Overlord without Hotsit or Boreas is insanely hard to do, but I've done it. It's not easy to stay there, though. Praetus is another one that's coming out soon. He's going to have a banner coming up soon. I'm going to totally summon for him. But these are, generally speaking, people that are going to deal magic damage. They deal high damage to like tanky sort of monsters. They're really, really nice for single target DPS arena, as well as like Gear Raid 1, Gear Raid 2. Guild Boss is generally predominantly destroyed by magic-based teams, right? So a lot of these heroes that you see in this particular category are used a lot. And on the epic side, they've got a ton of really good ones, right? He's going to be getting a buff soon. So he's just going to be changed and buffed very, very soon. And again, he's also a fusion hero, so you can get him completely free to play, and you can get all of his awakenings by just fusing for him, right? All of them are decent, but the standouts that you really want to pay attention to are like Iona, Greed, especially. So like Greed's one of those ones, like early on, he's all right. As soon as you get his 5th awakening, he's insanely good. That's its own video. Laurel is just required at a certain point. Pyros. God, I want Pyros. Anyways, sorry. Looking at the heroes I don't have makes me cry. Abizu's insane. I use the heck out of her even to this day, right? And that's even over, the other chick, Aeon. So, food for thought. Healers. 2 kinds, really. Three. You have your single target healers, you have your AoE healers. Yeah, sure, you could say that, but for the most part, every single target healer has some way of healing more than one target, with some minor exceptions. The big one, though, is going to be the people that are throughput healers. These are the guys that are trying to actually give just raw healing. And then there are your buffing-based healers, which is the ones we generally use in like every single meta as soon as you unlock them. Right? Elwyn's a great example. She is just crazy, right? She has this wood elf that is insane. You can deploy it anywhere that a ground-based unit can go, and it heals them, and she gives rage regeneration, which is already nice, and it's rage regeneration to everyone on the entire map. And if you can ever pair her with somebody like Hollow, who, by the way, also gives rage regeneration, but gives it from healing and from her A5, it's just, these two stack up, and you can get insane rage regen on people just from those 2 healers, which are both very rare healers, but they're insanely good if you get them. Artemis is the only unique one in this particular one, in my humble opinion, and that is just because he is a healer who also does damage and applies anti-healing, which is important for Gear Raid 1, starting at level 19. She's getting a small little pseudo buff where she's getting an additional faction soon. Cool thing there. Rather than going through throughput versus non-throughput, I'm just going to highlight the best buff heroes. Without a doubt, Dolores is like S of S tier, right? She's literally the best epic, I would argue, in the entire game. As soon as you max her out, you can get a 40% inspiration with all of the buffs there. Inspiration gives her attack to other people in her range, which is great. So she basically buffs everyone else, gives them an attack boost, which allows you to bypass more defense thresholds, which therefore means you're doing more damage. So I just want to call her out. You can also use people like Dasomi, for this. He also has an inspiration. It's just a 20% inspiration. The difference between him and Dolores, though, if you start looking at like base stats, he's just slightly behind. Is about 13% behind her in the base stat for just having more attack. So again, if we're at 20%, and we're looking solely at attack values, in order for him to make up the difference, he needs to make up a total of 20% in order to be as good as Dolores, right? So if you look at about 13% increase from, just raw stats plus an additional, I believe it's at max 10% times 3, so 30%. This is a post-deployment attack buff, so you can get all of your other attack buffs in with it. You can actually get him to being a higher inspiration total than Dolores, only based on the fact that his base attack will eventually become much, much higher than hers. But he's a weird hero because he only actually heals you up to 50%. She's also weird because she's also chaotic, and the chaotic faction likes to play with death. That will be its own faction video, but it's a good talk. I do want to highlight, though, without a doubt, there are some insane blue healers, right? So Autumn increases crit rate for every single person within their range, but also, I believe, does she change it in here? No. There we go. So when she's using her ultimate, increases crit rate, but also increases crit damage, and that actually goes up to a total of 60% crit damage during her ultimate, which you can get down pretty low on cost, right? So you're looking at 900 skill cost, 800 skill cost, and then she'll start out at 400, so she's already at like half of her rage when you deploy her, getting like a 60% buff there. You're getting, an additional, 20% there, so 30% crit rate plus 60% crit damage. Early game, this girl's insane. And her cost is 5. The key, though, with any of these buff healers like her, they don't really do a lot of healing. In fact, they're not that great at healing. I wouldn't recommend having like her try to be a solo healer, right? You can have a few people that can easily solo heal. Maidan, Elowin, right? These guys can solo heal an entire group. She couldn't. Not easily, at least. You'd have to be so far above that content that it's insane. The other one that is on the blue side is going to be Nuena, this chick, just because she also has inspiration, so you can get a 15% inspiration with her, I believe it is. Yeah. And, you know, again, if you don't have Dolores, you're super, super early game, and you happen to get her, great. Use her because you can get inspiration. Other buff people you'll get early, right? She's also a buff person because she has attack speed increase, which is always nice. So you'll see a bunch of them are out there, right? So buff, buff, buff. She technically has a buff, and the condition for it to come off is not that great. Buff. I believe buff. Yes, buff. Buff, buff. Pseudo buff. 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 These ones are all of the ones you really want to focus on, because having those buff-based healers are great. You'll notice for like
I strike true.
guild boss, the way I do my comp has 2 buff-based healers, right? So I actually use Desomi and Dolores in combination with each other, and they're the only ones doing healing, right? And so the reason I do it this way is because it allows me to have basically 100% uptime of inspiration. So when Dolores isn't ulting, which is the only time she provides inspiration, Desomi is applying inspiration to every single person on my team, and that allows me to continue to deal damage even outside of inspiration windows. There's things I could do to make that better if I really felt like it, or if I wanted to do, you know, some differences. I just got Laurel, so in theory I can do other strategies that involve her, but for now, I'll call it there. So, that's Heroes in a nutshell, and if you've made it this far into this video, you'll start to understand a little bit about the why I wanted to split gear and the heroes themselves, because really I want to focus on archetypes of heroes. And the main ones being your tanky fighters, as well as your AoE damage fighters and your single target fighters and your fighters that hit at a long range and all these other ones, right? All of your fighters have their own categories. Then you have your control tanks versus your just meaty boys, right? And making sure you know which one's which, so that when you're applying those tools to various compositions, you're able to come up with different ways to solve the same problem. Great example, just early on. I have a thing. I don't ever look at somebody else's guide before I actually start completing the event myself, right? So I want to be able to beat something by myself. My way of handling gear raid, 19? Is different than like Fastidious, for example, because for me, and I know no one's geared, so it's gonna fail. It's fine. But for me, the way I do it is I actually use Sadie here to apply a buff that prevents me from getting one shot by the boss. And so what a lot of people will do is they put invulnerable heroes around rather than trying to, you know, do all of that. But you can see, even with no gear on, I managed to survive the one shot. So anyways, things to think about. I use heroes differently than other people. So that's what I mean about like having tools for the tool shed and making sure that you're using them accurately. So with that, I will cut this already long video off here. So if you have any other questions, please feel free to leave a comment. As always, if you like this kind of content, please feel free to subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out a lot. And I will see you on the next one.